Wednesday morning, I was in my office, and I had just a spare moment between meetings, and I began to think about all the people that I knew who were struggling. And I thought about people who were struggling with their health, and we have some who are not here right now because they're struggling with health. I thought about all the people I know that are in a waiting pattern about their health. They're waiting to get news. And while they're waiting, they're afraid. They're fearful. And then I thought about people who were struggling economically because of high inflation and what groceries cost and what everything costs. It's really difficult for me to believe how expensive things have become. So Steve was talking to me this week, and he said, I wanted you to know I'm driving a new pickup for the Ford place here over to Hinton. And he said it's a big diesel pickup, and it's a platinum, and that means it's really high level. And he said, it's like nothing I've ever driven before. And I said, can you tell me what the sticker price is on it? And he looked and he said, I think it says $97,000. And I thought, who can pay? Who can buy? And so I thought about everybody struggling that way. And then I soon later got news of an acquaintance of mine who lost her 15-year-old grandson. And just a few years earlier, lost a son who was a police officer. And I began to think about all this stuff that's going on and how people struggle. And then I thought, but as Christians, as kingdom people, we're supposed to be a people of joy. Regardless of circumstances, we're supposed to be a people of joy. And then I thought, well, I've always heard that the book of Philippians is a book about joy. In fact, there's an old-time preacher. He taught at Oklahoma Christian for several years in the Bible department. His name is Avon Malone. And Avon Malone would go over the entire country of the United States at least, and he would preach, and primarily preach from this book, the book of Philippians, and he would talk about joy. And I thought, well, I think just for my own benefit, I'm going to just skim through and see what I can find that has to do with joy. Now, before I get finished this morning, you're probably going to wish that I would have obeyed the elders and skipped, okay? You're probably going to wish that. But I did go from chapter to chapter. I just quickly took notes. I just very, very quickly took what do I see that has to do with joy? And I noticed that Paul, as he begins this book, is saying that I'm in prison. I'm in chains. And yet the way he says it is, it's almost like he's glad. It's almost like he's delighted because he said, you can't believe, my terminology, you can't believe all the good things that are happening because I'm in these chains. Some really good stuff is going on. But then as I kind of read through the book, I thought, I think there's an underlying problem going on in that church at Philippi. Now, we just finished the book of Ephesians. The book of Ephesians comes right before the book of Philippians. And we know in the first part of the book of Ephesians, they're having problems with unity because how do you get Jews and Gentiles to be together in one body when they don't even like each other? And in the latter part of the book of Ephesians, we talked about how people were struggling making the transition from living like people of this world, the darkness of this world, to becoming kingdom people or kingdom of light people and living like people of light. They're struggling. And yet the struggle in the church at Philippi seems to be that people are bickering and they're quarreling and they're fighting. Now, I don't think that joy and what I've just described can coexist. So if in your marriage you are bickering and you're quarreling and you're disagreeing, you're probably not finding much joy. And if you have a child or children and you're continually bickering and quarreling and disagreeing, you're probably not finding much joy. If that's happening where you work, it's not a joyful environment in which to work. And so often in congregations, people tend to quarrel and bicker and not get along. And I'm convinced that when that keeps going on, that people don't even want to come to our assemblies. And I'm convinced that some people don't come because of that. And so that book is kind of set in that kind of an environment. So I was reading. And after Paul says he was in chains, he begins to say, I've been praying for you. And I came to verses 9 and 10 of chapter 1. And as I always do, I start off with the New International Version. And I read these two verses in the New International Version. And I didn't understand it. So I want you to read it with me from the New International Version. This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. Now, hang on to the word love, because love is synonymous with maturity. If you look at what Peter will say, remember that passage Peter will say, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, knowledge patience, patience temperance, and temperance godliness, and finally he says add love. It's kind of what some might call the gold standard of Christian maturity. And I want you to really grow in love so that you may be able to discern what is best and pure and blameless. And I read that and I thought, I don't know what that means. What does it mean that I grow in love so I can discern what is best? So then I looked in other translations. You know, if you've got a Bible app on your phone, you can click on any number of translations. And I finally ended up with my favorite in terms of modern speech, the easy-to-read version. It is a translation. And so I reread it out of the easy-to-read version, and I want you to see what it says there. This is my prayer for you, that your love will grow more and more, that you will become more and more mature, that you will have knowledge and understanding with your love, so that you will see the difference between what is important and what is not important. And you'll choose what is important. And all of a sudden, I just stopped. And I thought, what an interesting statement. That I could grow and mature to the point that I could determine what is important and what is not important. And I could choose the important. But then as I was scribbling through that in my mind, I thought, well, I don't understand that exactly, because what's important to one person is not important to another. And I began to think in my marriage, how often Suze will think something's really, really important, and I think it's not important at all. And how often I think something's really, really important, and she doesn't think it's important at all. And if we let it, that can become a source of tension. And then I thought about when my dad died. I think my dad died about 1.5 years ago. Our mother died about 1.5 years before he died. But when Daddy died, Steve and Nick and I went down to their house, and we were going to clean it out. So we rented one of these great big roll-off dumpsters. If I recall correctly, it may have taken 2. So we started going through their things. We went through the attic, the closets, the garage, the storage shed, and the beauty shop. The beauty shop was packed. My mother, right there at the edge of the house, in the back of the house, had a beauty shop for at least 20 years of my growing up life. And so we would pull it out and we would look at it and we would say, essentially, this is important, this is to be kept, or this is unimportant. It would either go into the roll-off dumpster or it would go into a pile of stuff to give away. As I told you, the roll-off dumpster filled up very, very quickly to be hauled off. I would say we're 90%, maybe as high as 90%, 5% of the things were not important to us. For example, there was an organ in her house. Most of these things were accumulations of my mother. There was an organ. We had the paperwork on the organ. We know what they paid for it. We know where they bought it. My mother could play the organ. She could play the piano. Do you know you cannot give an organ away? Nobody knows how to play the organ. Nobody wants to know how to play the organ. Same is true with the piano. I'm not sure what Steve ever did with the organ. But to my mother, those things were important. But to us, they were not important. And I kind of began to think about how things work in life like that. How often we get into messes because we don't know the difference between what's important and what's not important, and we start bickering and quarreling and fighting about it. And that's especially true. It's always true in families, by the way. It's so easy to fall in this trap. But it's especially true in churches. What's important and what's not important. Remember how we've been saying for a long time in Scripture, if it's really, really plain, it is what? Important. And if it's going to be important, it'll be really, really plain. But there are so many things that aren't plain. And one of the things I appreciate about right here is, a few years ago, we had this thing called COVID. Now, we were like other churches, we're very regimented, just very regimented. The same thing, the same way, and didn't do it the right way, then people had opinions about it, and then we couldn't even meet. We couldn't even meet. For weeks upon weeks upon weeks, we couldn't even meet. And Bert came to our rescue, and four of us actually, would be in this room, and we would video it and send it out to people. When we came back after COVID, we didn't do it the same way. We haven't done it the same way since. And I suspect people had opinions about that. I suspect people had a thought about, well, I wish we'd do it this way, or I wish we'd do it that way. We no longer pass trays for communion. We still pick up those little things back there. And all kinds of other things. But not one person that I know of has grumbled and argued and fought. It's been complete harmony. Though you may have different opinions about certain things, it's been complete harmony. Not a single problem. And so I want to take you to this quote. This quote was, I think, originally designed for, it's attributed to, I should say, the beginning of the Restoration movement. But as I have looked into it, I think it goes way back beyond that. Maybe to early days of Christianity. So look at what it says. I've abbreviated it, but I'll tell you what it really is. What is essential, in all things essential, that's the way the quote really reads, unity. In all things essential, unity. That's what they early used to say. Now, what's essential? Well, God, the Creator, is essential. Jesus, the Savior, the one who came, is essential. The Spirit living in us is essential. And then you go through a funeral like last Tuesday and you begin to understand all the more it's really essential that while you're here in this lifetime, you better make preparation for what's going to come after this lifetime. And what's essential is you go back to the book of Acts and you understand people there recognized that they had a sin problem and the sin problem was really bad. And if you don't take care of your sin problem, you've got problems throughout eternity. And what's really essential is they recognize that Jesus was the only answer to the sin problem. He's the absolute only way. There's no other way to the Father except through Him. That's essential. And you recognize in the book of Acts that all these people who recognized Jesus and their sins, then they responded in the same way. And they said, yes, we're willing to change how we live. What a monumental task to change how you live. And then they got baptized. And they became members of the kingdom. In all things essential, we have unity. We just try to be one. In all things non-essential, you have this thing called liberty or freedom. In all things not essential. Well, what's not essential? What's not important? Well, have you ever been a part of a church that's argued and fought over how you do a worship assembly? Have you ever known that? And doesn't it strike you kind of interesting that people would argue about that when no place in the New Testament does it tell us how to do a worship assembly? No place does it tell us exactly how to do it. And there are some things where you just don't know. It's not plain. It must not be that important. So in those things, give people freedom. Give people freedom to form their own opinions and their own thoughts and their own ways. And everything is harmonious until you try to make your thought and your way pushed on me. So in things that are essential, it's unity. In things that are non-essential, it's freedom. But in all things, you still practice love. And in all things, you practice love. So even if we start to get into a little difference, love brings me back to say, look, this is not worth fighting about. This is not worth ruining our joy and our happiness over. Then I thought, okay, what's important? What's not important? And I went back to this old famous statement in the book of Micah, and I want you to look at that again in the light of what I'm trying to say this morning. It's Micah chapter 6, it's verse 8. And you say, well, that's the Old Testament. And this same concept is carried over into the New Testament. It is God's nature. It was the way Jesus lived his life. What, O man or mortal man, is good? What does the Lord expect of all of you? What does he really require? What does God want from his people? To act justly. To act justly. Maybe I could put it this way. Do what's right. Do what's right. I was talking to a man a few weeks ago, and he said, I was younger when I was an employee working in a bank. And he said there was an older gentleman who founded the bank, who owned the bank, and it's a giant banking conglomerate. He said, I don't know how many times I went to him with a major problem. I thought the problem ought to have a solution to it. I was expecting him to give an answer. And sometimes it was about a big issue. And he said the only thing he ever told me was, do the right thing. Do the right thing. If it costs this bank money, I don't care. You do the right thing. That's to act justly. You see, I don't do one thing for my friend and another thing differently for a person who's not my friend. And it's not the color of your skin, and it's not your economic standing, and it's not anything to do with anything. I act justly every single time. And to love mercy. Mercy's got several dimensions to it. Mercy's this idea that I have this kindness and compassion toward people who have unfortunate circumstances. Or mercy means that I have kindness and compassion toward those people who mistreat me. Or mercy means I have kindness and compassion for people who have messed up their lives. And that's the way Jesus acted all the time. And there were people when he would act like this who would think, this is not right and this is not, you're missing the important part. And Jesus knew the difference between what was important and what was not important. And so Jesus was able to look upon someone who was a victim of misfortune. Remember the guy who is filled with demons? And he can't find a place to live except in the graveyard. And he screams because he's terrorized. He's in such pain all night long and terrifies the people in the city. And they don't like him, so they try to chain him, but he's so strong, he breaks the chains. And Jesus will walk up to him with such mercy and cast out all those demons. And do you remember the time that Jesus will encounter a woman? And she's been married 5 times. She's really messed up her life, and she's living with another guy right now. And it's almost like Jesus loved to do this. He couldn't wait to do this. To be kind to her and to receive her and to encourage her to go and live differently. And do you remember the time that he was literally hanging on the cross? He'd been nailed to the cross, and the agony was more than we could ever describe. And he looks out at all these people who are mocking him and who were responsible. And he said, Father, forgive them. Jesus knew out of great love how to act mercifully. And we need to learn that. I think for those who are my age, in fact, I will tell you, I will say it like this. I heard Kyle Moore get up at a Cowden reunion a few years ago before his death. And he said, I want you to know that I think we lived in the golden era of this country. In the aftermath of World War II, with all the explosion of the economy and the goodness of people, and I think all I've ever known is a world that's been really good, and now I've been distressed that it's getting kind of ugly and bad, and I think we've lived in a bubble. I think there were times even in America where people weren't good, a lot of ugliness. I think there have been times all over the world where people have been really ugly. And you know that some people didn't even know how to act or how to live. And right now, we're living in an environment where people don't even know what it is to tell the truth, and people don't know what it is to be honest, and people don't know what it is to be moral. And they walk into us, and we try to figure out what's important here. What's important is that we act justly. And what's important is we show them mercy and we show them kindness. We don't be stuffed up like you don't have it together and you messed up your life and you made this problem for yourself. We don't act like that. And we walk humbly. Because without humility, you cannot live in love. And without humility, you can never, ever make the difference clear in your mind. You can't distinguish between what's important and not important, because when you are prideful, whatever your opinion is, you think that's the only way it can be done. And you try to bind it on everybody else. And you wreck families and you wreck churches. I told you wish I'd taken off today. I told you would wish that. But I'm telling you, we're supposed to be people of joy. So look at this last thing. We're supposed to be people of joy. And there are some things not worth quarreling about and fighting about and even talking about. You have your thought about it. I have my thought about it. Suze has her thought about what's important. I think, this is crazy. I'm telling you, it used to be when we had a house in Lubbock and a house here, she would say, I want to take the blue dishes back to Lubbock. I may want to use them for this. I mean, that's a giant box of two or three boxes taking blue dishes. Why do we need blue dishes for this one little tiny event? To me, it was what? Not just unimportant, it was ridiculous. And I found out if I kicked and I fussed and I just keep complaining, it caused a problem. And it wasn't important at all that I fight about it. It's okay if she wanted the blue dishes. I mean, I was right, we didn't need them, but she thought we did it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not until I spend my life on what's important, and I don't fight with you about what you feel about is important or not important. And everything that's essential, we can be one. You can kind of count those on one hand, maybe two. And everything else, there's freedom. And we can have that freedom because we love each other. And we can be these people who just do the right thing, who want to show mercy. And there are all kinds of people in our own families, and there are all kinds of people all over Cordell who need mercy right now. They would love to have it. But to do that, you've got to walk knowing that you're just an ordinary person and you're nothing special. I tell students all the time, you are really, really, really special. But you're no more special than anybody else. Everybody got that? That's my definition of humility. You're really, really, really special. But you're no more special than anybody else. In God's eyes, we're all special. But no one's more special than anyone else. So, on a journey for joy, I may do it again. The crowds may get smaller, but I may do it again. I'm thinking Philippians may say some more about joy. And we ought to be a joyful people in spite of the giant heartaches and the giant problems. We have a whole section of people not here today because they're hurting, they're sick. Jesus was everything we're supposed to be. He was everything we're supposed to be and everything we want to be. And let's take a moment to remember that he died to give us that. He knew we would live in a world of mess. But he was going to save us. He promised us heaven. He promised to walk with us. And he died to give us that in the midst of everything else. That's why Paul can be in chains, can be literally in chains, and speak in the first few verses of Philippians like, folks, this is good. People are listening to the gospel, and people are learning, and people are growing, and some people are doing it for the wrong reasons. They're preaching for the wrong reasons, but so what? They never, see, I would say, whoa, don't listen to them. Paul says, so what? So long as the message of Jesus gets preached, it's wonderful news. Stick with what's important and be joyful.